Combs went on to add that perhaps at times they're a little too aggressive trying to make big plays defensively when what they really want to do is not allow big plays to happen offensively. Kyle Rowland from the Toledo Blade joins us now. And Kyle, when we talked last week heading into this Indiana game, we both said this is a legit Indiana team. We're going to learn something about the Ohio State secondary. And I'm afraid the thing we learned is that Ohio State secondary right now just is not necessarily at a championship level.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't pretty for large stretches of the game. Indiana had 4 pass plays over 50 yards. I think they had 10 plays that amounted to like 300 yards. Pretty staggering stuff. Obviously, they lit up the scoreboard most of that second half. I don't know. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not necessarily championship level. I think it's still possible they could win a national title with this defense just because the trends of college football. And if they played Alabama, I mean, I think like the first one to 63 would win. But they definitely, I mean, have to get things better here. I mean, Mac Jones and Trevor Lawrence, I'm sure licking their chops watching that Ohio State secondary. I don't know. I mean, I'll give Kerry Combs the benefit of the doubt for now. I mean, he's much smarter than me. So if he says and Ryan Day say they don't think it's scheme, it's more execution, that's fine. I think there are some things that might be an issue with the scheme. But certainly, I mean, Hooker, Marcus Williamson, both were not great at times on Saturday. So I think there are some individual guys who obviously need to improve. I don't know. Brandon Peters has played well this year, so maybe they will be tested at times on Saturday. But I would assume against a team like Illinois, Ohio State's defense will look a lot better, but you won't necessarily learn a whole lot just because of the quality of the competition.
Now, one way that Indiana consistently hurt Ohio State was, depending upon how you look at it, either the rub route or the pick route. I think offenses like to call them rub routes and defenses like to call them pick routes where the defenders get picked off. How do you combat that going forward for Ohio State? Because everybody's now seen that game plan. They know that that's one way Ohio State is vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the ultimate question. I mean, I've talked about that with other people this week of that film, like, could haunt them. I mean, Indiana was just so effective. And ironically, it was Indiana in 2018 whose offensive film against Michigan is kind of what the blueprint was for Ohio State the following week when they scored 62 points. I don't know. I mean, if it is just minor little tweaks, which at this moment, Ryan Day and Kerry Combs would lead you to believe, I don't think it'll be that big of a deal, the things Indiana did, because theoretically Ohio State would be able to improve them. But if there are kind of, fundamental issues like Ohio State's defense was in 2018, I mean, that whole season was just a slog. I mean, every game seemed to be in doubt at times. Then I think you're going to have problems all season. I think teams are definitely going to, implement the same plan that Indiana had. The one thing that's different, though, about that and more difficult is Indiana is good. Like, this wasn't like a bad team like Maryland in 2018, giving Ohio State a run for their money, or Purdue. Like, Indiana's good. Michael Penix is good. Freifogel is really good. I mean, like all these pieces are legitimate players and a really good offense. So, I mean, part of it could just be that Indiana is much better than people think.
Speaking of that 2018 defense, Ryan Day was quick to point out on Tuesday that the big difference between the 2018 defense and 2020 defense, that 2018 defense struggled all across the board. This year, the defense has been very good at stopping the run. I think a lot of that goes back to the strong linebacking play we have seen.
Yeah, I mean, the linebackers have been really, really good. Tuff Borland, a guy who has been under fire, seems like his entire career, is definitely having his best season. Pete Werner, I think, is a really underrated guy, and I think he has been for a better part of a year. And then Baron Browning, I mean, everyone kind of knows he's really good. I do agree. Like, this is not a 2018 thing. I mean, every Ohio State fan has, had glimpses back to that on Saturday, and we're just horrified. But, I mean, that defense was just bad at everything. This one is not. And even though they're not getting a bunch of sacks, like they are getting pressure and getting to the quarterback. I know people like wanted to point out to that on Saturday, like, hey, they got to, help bail out the secondary a little bit by getting pressure. But I mean, I think they are getting pressure and they are stopping the run. So, I mean, it was basically a big play issue. One thing I don't believe is some have said, oh, they're up 35-7 and blah, blah. But like Indiana was really good in the second quarter though, too. And it was kind of overrated that Ohio State got up 31-7 or 35-7, just because part of that was they had consecutive possessions at the end of the first half and then the beginning of the second. I mean, it was going to be 21-14, and then Indiana turns it over inside the 5, and then the next time they got the ball back, it was 35-7. So, I mean, Indiana's offense was good the final 3 quarters of the game, and I don't really think being up 35-7 had anything to do with that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that 35. The fact that the Ohio State offense scored 35, 42 because of 7 points from the pick 6 from Sean Wade and the extra point, but 35 points from the Ohio State offense, 300 yards passing from Justin Fields, over 150 yards rushing from Master Teague. And yet we're still thinking to ourselves the offense could have done a little bit better because of the 3 turnovers from Justin Fields, the 3 interceptions. And you look at those interceptions, and certainly 2 of those, it looked as if Justin Fields was simply trying to do a little too much, perhaps thinking he could pull a magic trick out of his hat, and maybe it would have been the more prudent thing just to throw the ball away instead of trying to make the magical play.
Yeah, it was an interesting game. It was a great game. I mean, I thought. I mean, it totally exceeded expectations, I would say, especially since the line was 21 points. Both teams left thinking they could have done more, I think, for sure. I mean, Fields, I guess you got to say it was the worst game of his career, considering he had thrown 3 total interceptions before, and then he doubled his total on Saturday. But that said, he was still spectacular for parts of it. Just a couple really ill-advised throws. I don't know if it was he was playing at such a high level that he just believed he would be able to make a play somehow. But obviously he looked much more human, falling to the ground and just throwing the ball up, and such a heads-up play by Julian Fleming on that. Who knows what happens if Indiana doesn't turn it over there. But offensively, I mean, I thought Ohio State was still pretty dynamite. I mean, the first possession was obviously huge. When they needed to score late, they did. I thought the run game was obviously kind of a story. I mean, Master Teague had his best game. He was really explosive. He had the long touchdown run, and he was just able to churn out yards and do it, 5, 6, 7 yards at a time. I thought Trey Sermon played his best game as a Buckeye. Garrett Wilson, another 100-yard receiving day, and Chris Olave was good. I mean, there really were no issues other than like the Fields interception. So if I was, Ryan Day and the offensive guys, I'd still be really confident going forward.
Let's talk a little about this game Saturday against Illinois. Now, if you'd have asked an Illinois Fighting Illini fan 4 years ago, their starting quarterback was going to be Peters, like, yeah, absolutely. We got this kid Eli Peters coming in. He's going to be fantastic. Well, Eli Peters did go to Illinois, and then once they made the coaching change, Lovie Smith came in. Eli realized he wasn't going to fit into Lovie Smith's style. That's when Eli Peters transferred to Ohio State, and now you've got Brandon Peters, the former Michigan quarterback, no relation to Eli, but Brandon Peters is now settled into that starting role at quarterback for Illinois, even though they've had 3 other guys start this year, a lot of those because of injuries and some COVID situations. But right now, as you alluded to earlier, Brandon Peters, former Michigan Wolverine quarterback, is the starting quarterback for the Illini.
Yeah, it's interesting because Peters never really he got in briefly the 2018 game, but he did not play in the 2017 game when he was a starter at the end of the year because he had gotten hurt the week before. So that was John O'Korn. I mean, he's played pretty well this season. I mean, the way Ohio State's defense played last week, you would think that perhaps he will have some, good moments on Saturday. I think Ohio State's defense has to make this a game where we're going to, clamp down and make a statement as a secondary.
And it's something they need to do for 4 quarters instead of just 2 quarters, unlike we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, the second halves the last 2 weeks, or I guess last 2 games since there was a cancellation, have been dreadful for Ohio State. And they kind of let their guard down against Penn State some of the second half of that game. clearly it's been emphasized since Ryan Day got into the post-game press conference after the IU game. I would be stunned if Ohio State had a poor second half this week. And I think they'll put, all four quarters together. They're a big favorite. Illinois is not good. You do wonder if the mental part of things creep in at all this week. It's Thanksgiving week. It just kind of everything comes to the forefront of, man, like we don't get to see our families. We've been doing this forever. Now we have to go to Champaign, not to, I don't want the Chamber of Commerce coming after me, but just a dreary late November day in Champaign is not the greatest way for these guys to spend their Saturday. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they start in the first quarter, I think.
Well, and speaking of families, Illinois did announce that family members would be allowed to attend the game this Saturday. Now, the good news is a family member can go. The bad news is, as you alluded to, Champaign, never exactly the garden spot of Illinois in the best of climates. In late November, we know how bad that wind is in Bowling Green. That wind starts in Champaign, it feels like most of the time. So it's never been a pleasant experience to be in Champaign late November. Yet Ohio State families, some of them will have that opportunity if they so choose this week.
Yeah, I'm convinced that in the July 4th weekend, it's 55 and gray and windy in Champaign. I'm going to have to go there sometime to find out. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be a big boost to be able to have their families, watch this week. I know it was a huge letdown last weekend, not being able to go to that Indiana game. And people outside kind of say, I mean, but it's not the same experience. Like it's empty. There's no atmosphere. Like when you are a parent of a kid, like you want to go to their games. Like these people have gone to every single one of their kids' game their entire lives. Like these are moments they're going to remember forever. Some of them won't be playing much longer. This could be their last season. So it's a big deal to not be able to see them, especially when you consider all the circumstances of the virus and they haven't seen them much anyway. And after games, they're really not even allowed to talk that much. So it definitely is tough for everyone involved. And Ohio State will be having a Thanksgiving meal at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center this year. So they're kind of doing as much as they can for these players to make it a little normal and create light moments for them.
One final thought, not to continue the bashing of the weather in Champaign, but we have seen over the years, you go back to the 2011 game where Ohio State won, completing just one pass. There's been many times where Ohio State has gotten very conservative in Champaign. So I guess going back to the win over Indiana, we saw Ohio State rush the ball very well against the Hoosiers. You need that type of rushing game traditionally when you go to Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, that will be important, I think, for Master Teague and Trey Sermon both to play well again this week and the O-line to block. It's a little different with Justin Fields at quarterback as opposed to 2011. So I think he'll be able to handle it. But, I mean, you don't know what the weather. I mean, if you get 30-mile-an-hour winds, which is totally possible there in cold weather, who knows what happens. And another underrated factor is the kicker situation for Ohio State. I mean, it's not great right now. And I wouldn't expect Illinois to come down to a field goal. But, I mean, last week, Ohio State could have been up 10 at the end of the game instead of 7. So who knows? Down the road, that could be a problem.
All right. Thank you very much, Kyle Rowland from the Toledo Blade. You can read Kyle's coverage of Ohio State both online and in the print editions of the Blade. Kyle, thank you.